So, Jessica, can you say hello?
Hello, everyone.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. Can you give us a self-introduction as you pull up your slides?
Sure. I think just by looking at my bio, you can tell that education is in whatever function I've held or leadership role or position I've held, education is really the underlying theme. It's my North Star. When in private practice, I loved educating my clients in areas of the law that would mitigate their risk and help them build a stronger organization. Similar with teams that I work with, I try to create a growth mindset and environment where we come to a common understanding of a best path forward through inquiry and breaking habits that might hold us back as individuals and organizations. So you have the formal bio, but then you also have kind of the underlying theme that runs through each of my choices. With that, I'd like to begin. Hopefully you're all seeing the screen. And let me make sure that I've got it set at the right screen share. There we go.
Could you go up to, there it goes. Perfect. Thank you. Take it away.
Basically the focus of this afternoon's discussion, and I'd like it to be kind of a virtual discussion, even that you might have internally, right? And it's some things that you think about, whatever stage of your leadership journey you may find yourself. But I want to take a step back and basically tell a story, right? And tell a story about my inspiration as you all are thinking about human-centered leadership. How do you define it? How is it being human-centered leadership present in your organization? And who inspires you to create a human-centered organization? So if you look at the picture, think back, it is Christmas Eve, 1947. And those women from descending order to ascending order in height, they're my inspiration. They're my inspiration to create a human-centered organization. The who of these women were first-generation Italian-American women, all sisters, fondly known as the sisters, both inside and outside of our family organization. And this is a photo that they sent to their one brother, God help him, when he was stationed overseas in Japan. And why I wanted to focus on this is kind of the beginning to human-centered leadership and my inspiration is the what did they lead, how did they lead, why they led, and why, as observing their leadership style as a child and then as a young woman and as I got older, lessons of both triumphant leadership with each of these women and their failures and how I saw that impacted who they led, which were basically us. And so what was, they led the next generation of the women in our family to self-actualization. Why they led was out of love, and that'll be a theme that sometimes I think we're hearing more and more in leadership. When I started on early in my career and specifically in the environment in which I was, it wasn't a word that you used to describe leadership. But they led for the love of their family. They had a common mission, which was to make that next generation of women more fulfilled and more empowered to lead. They knew what the responsibility was, which was to drive each of our growth in the women in our family. How they led, it was an unwavering commitment to excellence, the quality that they wanted to instill in us and how we led our lives and how we presented ourselves and showing up, not meaning physically, but how we showed up as professionals, how we showed up in whatever path we chose to take, a spirit of excellence. And they also had compassionate accountability. And I'll talk a little bit about it. Although at times, like any family, you're thinking, oh, wow, it's a lot. They were funny and they were fun to be around, and it was fun to be in their midst. And I think that helped influence their leadership style. Two of the women, the two women right here chose to lead lives that at the time were unconventional. They set their own path. It was unconventional for them in terms of the ethnic group in which they grew up, in which they were maturing, and it was unconventional for them at that time. So these two women here chose to pursue careers outside of the home, and they chose and were recognized within their community as both being somewhat innovational in how they approach their leading their lives. So this woman chose a career in the emerging airline industry at the time, and this woman chose a career in government. This tiny woman here at the end, my mom, I think embodied the spirit of all of the attributes of human-centered leadership. At the time that I was growing up, she was one of the few moms in the early 70s that ran her own business. So I was able to see how, and really this concept of human-centered leadership is something that I've been exploring as a young child. So what are the attributes of strategic leadership or human-centered leadership? It's strategic, it's reflective, it's disciplined and accountable, it's compassionate, and there's a level of humility, humbleness, where you're open to new ideas, right? You lead, you make decisions, but you don't hold any of those decisions too strongly because you want to be able to be open to the intelligence, the collective intelligence, the professionalism and the experience of the team that you're leading. I love this quote. I'll share this book. You can see it's dog-eared and tattered, but it's one of my favorites. It's called Ignite Culture, Empowering and Leading a Healthy High-Performance Organization. It's by Margaret Graziano. And in that book, she quotes Sean Fairclough, "To embrace humanism is to embrace the concept that caring for our fellow human beings is our highest calling." And I think in human-centered leadership, that's really the North Star. It's both practical and aspirational. Practical because it makes sense. I recently attended executive leadership education for a week at Harvard Business School. It was put on by the chiefs of staff, and we actually had a unit with other chiefs of staff focused on human-centered leadership. So not only is it the right thing to do, but in this case study at Harvard, they let us know that it's good business sense as well. But we want to lead with the fact that it's the right thing to do. So it's aspirational, and it's not easy. I always kind of brace myself that be prepared for setbacks, but don't let setbacks knock you off the path to this type of leadership. I've experienced human-centered leadership in various forms, and I'll talk to that a little bit as I kind of give more of a case study light in the next couple of slides. I think if I had to aim at one, and I think one that's really difficult, it's to manage to in a way that is human-centered, is disciplined and accountable. And it's being accountable to ourselves, it's being accountable to each other, it's being accountable to our leaders in terms that many people hear the term managing up. And it's being accountable to the teams that we create and to our colleagues and to our peers. Strategic, whatever role we currently inhabit, whether it's on the executive leadership team, whether it's in the management team, whether it's more entrenched within the organization and the operational aspects, I think human-centered leadership all calls upon us to be strategic in thinking, not only how does this advance me as an individual? How does it advance my team or my business unit? But more importantly, how does it advance and how are we being strategic about the organization with whom we're engaged and who we're leading? We have a concept here at Loyola. I've been teaching law and regulations for organizational leaders here in our School of Continuing and Professional Studies since May of 2015, so coming up on 10 years. But it's this concept that we are all leaders. Another book that I love, and I actually use it to teach in my course, is Heroic Leadership. It's written by a former Jesuit who, at the time, he left the order and went on to pursue a career in financial services, but used the tenets that he learned as a Jesuit in his financial services career. But this notion that we're all leaders is a significant one, and I'll kind of tease them out here as I talk about my experiences. So I've experienced various cultural settings, right? I started out in a for-profit organization in boutique law firms, then in larger mid-sized law firms. I had experience working as a management consultant in international trade regulation in one of the big four in Deloitte. I've held leadership positions in associations. So the Bar Association, Chicago Bar, Illinois State Bar Association, the Justinian Society of Lawyers, which is an ethnic bar association. I've experienced leadership being led by and orchestrating the leadership and the learning and facilitating the learning in my class with my students. And then here most recently at Chicago's Jesuit Catholic University, Loyola University of Chicago. And so throughout each of these varied experiences, I've always questioned and wondered and seen how does human-centered leadership play out? And some of the common themes are what's the best for the organization, right? And recognizing that the organization's people are our primary stakeholders. So how do we balance all of the competing needs and demands of our stakeholders, right? So going back here just for a little bit, I want to give some examples of good examples that I've seen human-centered leadership at play. So my early experience in the law firm was a small boutique law firm. We were a law firm of about 5. At the time, I was the only woman in the law firm. I was an associate. And this is going back to late 90s, early 2000s. Our mission was clear. There was clarity in how we engaged with each other and how we engaged with our clients. So first and foremost, it was we want to deliver the best legal services that we can for our clients, lead with integrity, but then also, this was at the time what really whet my appetite for looking at, we had a model of leadership that was a little bit different from most of the organizations or legal organizations that my friends were at. There was a quality life component and a work-life balance component that the partners held very dear. The other component that I looked at with the human-centered leadership was they led with integrity, right? It wasn't uncommon for us to really look at clients to say, are their values aligned with our values? And we did that so that we felt good about delivering the services that we did to our clients, and we felt that our values and our clients' values were aligned. This was long before talk about human-centered leadership and kind of organizational values became in vogue. I'll tell you a funny story. I was actually on my honeymoon, and I checked into the office, and the partner overheard me speaking to our administrative leader and said, "Is that Jessica on the phone?" She said, "Yep, it's Jessica." So he said, "I'd like to talk to Jessica." And so he gave me I got on the phone and he said, "Jessica, you're on your honeymoon." I said, "Yeah, but I just want to check in on this particular client." And he said, "Jessica, you're on your honeymoon and I'm going to hang up because we've got it under control. You know, hopefully you're enjoying yourself and we don't want to hear from you again." So that was part one with this firm. Part two with this firm is when my dad was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. And, you know, from diagnosis to his death was a period of 4 months. And I was still at, I was at this firm. I had returned to this firm after having an experience in big law. And I came to them and said, "Here's the situation. You know, I want to work for as long as I can, but you know, as my dad enters hospice, I think there's going to come a time when I'm going to have to slow down." Right. So I just want to partner with you and plan with you in how do I, redistribute the work. No questions asked. We quickly figured out a plan, how I could slowly wind down so I could spend those 3 weeks putting me and my family, but more importantly, me at this crucial stage in my life. I was 39 years old. I was very close to my dad. And putting that health and that relationship, realizing that that was an important relationship at the forefront. And so we worked together on a plan. We managed to that plan. I'll remember this as well. The day of my dad's funeral, all of the lawyers, all of the partners showed up. And, the first thing I said, which, your mind is a little bit, at least for me, cognitively, my mind was a little bit not where it was at that stage of my dad's funeral. And I looked at them and I said, "Oh my God, all of you are here. I'm sorry, the billable hours." And they just looked at me and they shook their heads and they said, "Jessica, the billable hours of the firm for these 2 hours are secondary. We know what this day needs to do, and it's that support." So to me, you can find human-centered leadership and seek to have that in organizations that may be conceived as traditionally not you. That was in the past, right? I know a lot of organizations are really focused on this. So how do you sustain it in organizations? And how do you sustain it in organizations where there's a level of complexity because of the size, the depth, the breadth of the organization? You try to make it a strategic priority. So I tried by those too many case studies to share how that particular firm and my colleagues at that firm made that a strategic priority, made culture and well-being. And I really do think it made me at that point a better lawyer, made me want to work well and deliver for our clients because I knew that my colleagues had a very unique but human way of looking at what we did, almost vocationally. So you make it a strategic priority, and you focus on both culture and climate. These are closely aligned. I like to say they're cousins or sisters. If you look back from my very first slide, but they are slightly different. And we'll go into that in a minute. And you move through the challenges, and the challenges are many, because I think when you're driving with a human-centered leadership, you're also having to balance the needs and the business needs of the organization with what's in the best interest of your leadership team, or more importantly, your staff. So when you move through the challenges, you be open to the extent that you can. You lead with good intent. Here at Loyola, we have part of our Jesuit mission and this concept, the presupposition that people come to wherever they are with good intent. And you be courageous in your decision-making, in your conversations. And I think this one is really one of the most difficult ones, is that, at least for me personally, I don't want to be general and say everybody, but for me personally, it's being courageous in your decision-making and in your conversations. And what I mean by that is sometimes the hardest thing is to deliver difficult news or challenging news to individuals. But in many times, it's also the kindness, right? So there's this, at Deloitte, we talk about courageous conversations that you have with your clients as you're giving them advice on particular paths that may be difficult for them to implement, and courageous with your colleagues, right? And it kind of helps the path of decision making. So when we're talking about climate and culture, both critical components of human-centered leadership, what's the difference? In climate tells you how we're functioning as an organization, basically the organizational effectiveness, and the culture tells you why, what sustains organizational effectiveness. And I almost think of climate is the system and culture is the field. And there's a causal relationship between the culture and the climate. On the left, climate, like I said, it's the structures, it's empowerment, it's involvement, making sure that people appropriately at particular levels are involved in the decision making and kind of understand the why. It's having systems in place, which many organizations do. Technology, job design, and looking at interdependence between, and we're entering this, as many of us know, with AI, but basically job design, interdependence, the use of technology, the skills, the qualities, communication. This is always a tricky one in many organizations, in almost all of them in which I've worked, especially since the early aughts. It seems like the pace of what we do is so rapid that the communication sometimes is the most important ingredient, but it's the one that we're just maybe not as quick in terms of ensuring that there's effective communication. And then on the culture side, it's the values, leadership, and building, I think this one, the building strong relationships across the organization, collaboration, are really what drives a human-centered leadership style and a human-centered organization. When I think about it, on the culture side, and I'll give you examples of how we're working to implement, kind of make this part of our strategy. Here within the advancement division, we have a culture committee. And the culture committee basically uses our university, the Jesuit mission and leadership as one. And I see a couple of questions. So Felicia, I'll get to your question, advice on building a better climate and culture when facing challenges and adversity. So we have a culture committee. That culture committee really is looking at things as how is our onboarding working through a pulse survey. From that pulse survey, what are the qualities that we need to work with our managers, right? As a pulse survey, we're going to implement that at the end of this fiscal year. We have an all-staff retreat. The all-staff retreat usually tries to pick a theme. Last year was, a couple of years ago, it was the growth mindset. And we look for ways that we can tease that through throughout all that we do in terms of the professional development formal with our staff, but also what we encourage managers to focus on. To Felicia's question, any advice on building a better climate and culture when facing challenges or adversity? Yeah, I think when you're going through transitions, whether they're leadership transitions or the transitions that we're going through, now with the transition of technology, trying to put, whether it's a small group or small committee, trying to put culture at the forefront, right? And having leadership. We're very fortunate here that when we instituted the culture committee, it was originally our values task force. We had and continue to have our leadership team that no questions asked. Yep, this is the right thing to do, and we want to do that, right? So the advice that I would give is kind of look for your allies, look for allies within your leadership team in building and awareness of the importance of that culture and that climate. And it's not easy, right? I think it's, like I said earlier on, be prepared for setbacks. There's a lot of fits and starts, but don't let that fits and starts detract you or deter you. And I know in the interest of time, I want to make sure I'm mindful. There is culture that fosters staff engagement, right? These aren't my thoughts. These are thoughts from Human Synergistics International. I mentioned earlier on that I'm a member of the Chief of Staff Association, and one of our modules and webinars that we have featured this group out of Australia. And they basically say, this is what human-centered leadership looks like, and this is how they foster staff engagement. Some of these are just pretty common sense, right? But in the case of life that we have, sometimes they get missed. So having an affiliative environment, one that's collaborative without being so in that the balance of collaboration, decision-making, and action. I think that's always a tricky one. Treat people with dignity and respect. So that affiliative culture, that's the humanistic, the encouraging. One thing that I always try to do, I think it's maybe early on in my training and in my professional background in law, where I really do try to help others and myself grow and think critically about a situation. I think, again, once we're so fast paced and it's the tools, the technology, our pace is one that lends to just quick decisions and quick action. I find my best action is when I take a step back, go for a walk, and then come back to it with a critical eye and asking the right questions. I think that's a hallmark of leadership too, is asking the right questions to get people on to that next step. When I do ask questions, I'll always preface it with my team or with colleagues. Listen, I'm questioning to help me understand better. I'm not trying to be antagonistic, but but questioning is there to help me understand. And usually when I am present with that kind of attitude, people we then kind of then get to the problem solving mode or which decisions have to be taken. And then I think this is probably one of the most important pieces. For me, it is, I have quite candidly, this is an ongoing struggle with me, is me staying grounded, right? Stilling my mind so that reason and compassion reign, and reflecting and repeating. I think a clear mind is the mind that makes the right decisions. And a clear mind is one that leads both reasonably and compassion. So understanding why you are leading, understanding who you are leading, taking that time to recharge, reflect, stilling your mind, and so that reason and compassion reign. Early on, the cultures that I inhabited, was the billable hour. So your productivity was measured in basically how long you could work. It's taking me a long time to kind of unlearn that, so that I recognize signs of burnout and take the right action. I'll give you an example. We have a retreat center. So usually around March, I recognize that my signals are growing weak. My batteries needs some recharging. So I went off for a silent retreat for 3 days, and I came back more energized because I just had that opportunity to still my mind. That's something that personally recharges me. I'm gonna conclude there because I wanted to take us from what's my inspiration? Here are some case studies. Here's what human-centered leadership means to me. This is how I observed it. And then bring it back to us as individual leaders, some common strategies to stay grounded. Alyssa has a question, so I'll take that question until Ginger, you kind of tell me stop. How can I help disengaged employees? I want to be able to turn them around. They do a good job, but are not part of the team. I think this is a challenging question. So what I try to lead with is understand, and I've had discussions like this with staff. I try to understand their why, right? Why are you here? What do you enjoy about this work? What are the things that challenges you? How can I support you in what you are enjoying about this work? It leads to fulfillment, but also recognizing that work is work, right? That's why we're here. That's why we draw a salary, and try to tie the higher purpose with what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish as a team to the particular work that particular staff member is doing. And I recognize too that is a challenge here as we're looking at higher and higher numbers of disengaged staff. And I think I follow Society of Human Resources Manager, sure. I follow Harvard Business Review and many industry publications, and you kind of see that common theme. Alyssa, hopefully I answered your question. And sometimes the case is an employee is disengaged because it's just not the right fit for that particular employee at that particular moment. And I think one of our jobs as leaders, especially in human-centered leadership, is to graciously accompany that particular staff member to a place where they can't feel fully engaged. And I'll use myself as a personal example. I had planned on spending 2 years in the Big Four, basically an on-ramp after I took some time away after my dad passed. I ended up being there longer, close to 4 years. But at the time internally, I knew that was no longer the right fit. I had a desire, some would say jokingly, it was a calling to go into higher ed. I originally thought at the beginning of my career when I was a student that I would get a PhD. So in many respects, it's me coming home. But I recognized that I was disengaged. And so the manager that I was working with pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Jessica, we can work on this, this, and this, and this." And I remember she looked at me, and I will ever be thankful to Michelle. She looked at me and she said, "We can do this, this, and this, and this, but are you happy?" And I took a step back, right? She was our practice group leader at Loyola. And I wasn't. And so the issue was Michelle was a great leader because she helped me identify the piece that I wasn't willing to confront at that moment. Having her say that, like, "Jessica, we can do this, this, and this, but are you happy? Is this where you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years?" Put a question in my mind, and I went off, did some discerning, and ultimately made the decision that no, this isn't what I wanted at my stage of my life to look like. And so we worked on a path and how I can build that next phase and career in nonprofit and then in higher ed. So Alyssa, again, I hope I answered that question.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for that presentation. And everyone, Jessica is going to stay with us for our panel discussion. So before we move to our panel discussion for the afternoon, do you have any final words of wisdom on this topic?
I think as a wrap up is it was good advice that my dad gave when he was passing, right? And I said, "Dad, what wisdom would you give me?" He said, "Trust your gut because it's good, and be happy." And I think when we be happy, I think be happy in the role that we have today. Be grateful, and this is something that I really do grapple with. be grateful for the challenges that we have, because when I look back, every challenge that I had, whether it was in private practice or being the 7th woman president of a 100-year-old organization, every challenge that I had, when I look back now, I'm mightily grateful for those challenges, because when I confront challenges again, I think, okay, Jessica, you've been there. You know how to navigate this. Just be focused. And if need be, take that time away so that you can focus. So it may sound strange or counterintuitive, but I actually am grateful for the challenges that they present, because they've led me to where I am, and happily and contentedly am.
Well, thank you so much for that.